Welcome back to another slow drift into the shadows that Five Nights at Freddy's has cast across gaming history, like a darkness that refuses to lift no matter how many lights we shine into it. Tonight, we're exploring the questions that still haunt this franchise, the enigmas that Scott Cawthon either hasn't answered, can't answer, or perhaps never intended to answer in the first place. The threads that dangle in the void between games and books and movies, waiting for someone to pull them into clarity or let them fade into the beautiful uncertainty that defines this series. From locked boxes that may never open to children whose names we'll never know for certain. From bite victims whose attackers remain anonymous to timelines that twist and contradict themselves with every new release. We'll walk through every major mystery that remains unsolved as the franchise continues to evolve, expand, and occasionally eat itself in the process of growing. Whether you're here to finally catalog these lingering questions in your mind, letting the familiar frustration of unanswered lore wash over you like white noise as you drift towards sleep, or simply revisiting the gorgeous mess that makes this series so endlessly discussable. This journey through the unknown will carry you through everything Five Nights at Freddy's refuses to definitively explain. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of deep, immersive exploration of gaming mysteries. And let me know in the comments which unsolved FNAF mystery frustrates you the most, or which one you hope never gets answered. It's always fascinating to see how the community divides on whether we want concrete answers or prefer living in the ambiguity forever. Let's begin. Understanding why Five Nights at Freddy's has accumulated so many unsolved mysteries requires first understanding Scott Cawthon's unique approach to storytelling. Unlike most video game narratives that spell out their plots through cutscenes, dialogue trees, and exposition dumps, FNAF buried its lore in newspaper clippings that flash past in milliseconds, in mini-games with intentionally cryptic 8-bit graphics that could mean anything, in phone calls from unreliable narrators who might be lying or mistaken, and in hidden screens that only appeared under specific, obscure conditions that required data mining to discover. This wasn't accidental laziness or poor game design. Scott deliberately created a mystery box approach where players had to actively piece together the story themselves, comparing notes in forums and comment sections, building theories in collaborative spaces that felt more like detective work than passive consumption. The brilliance of this method was that it made every player feel like an investigator, every discovery feel earned rather than handed over on a silver platter. The game respected your intelligence and rewarded your attention to detail. The downside, which has become increasingly apparent over the franchise's decade-plus lifespan, is that some mysteries were created without clear solutions in mind, or with solutions that changed as the story evolved beyond its original scope, or with answers that Scott himself has admitted in interviews he's lost track of over the years. Forgotten in the chaos of releasing game after game after game, while the community demanded more content and more answers and more mysteries to solve. In the early days, from FNAF 1 through FNAF 3, the community was remarkably successful at solving Scott's puzzles. The identity of Purple Guy as William Afton, the truth about the missing children and their possession of the animatronics, the nature of Springlock suits and how they functioned, the reason the animatronics attacked night guards, thinking they were endoskeletons without suits. All of these fell into place as players collaborated and compared findings across YouTube and Reddit and game forums. Scott himself confirmed that the fanbase solved the first 3 games correctly, that the pieces fit together the way he intended, that the mystery was solvable and had been solved. But something shifted with FNAF 4. The game introduced ambiguities that the community couldn't crack, questions that had multiple equally valid interpretations, mysteries that seemed to contradict themselves depending on how you looked at them and which evidence you prioritized. Scott later admitted in interviews, particularly his candid conversation with Dawko in 2024, that FNAF 4's story was too broad, too open to interpretation, that he'd created something even he couldn't clearly communicate to his audience. The message got lost in the delivery. This was the turning point where unsolved mysteries stopped being temporary puzzles waiting for the community to crack them and became permanent fixtures of the franchise. Questions that might never have definitive answers because the answers themselves have become uncertain in Scott's own mind as the story grew beyond its original scope, branching and mutating into something larger and stranger than anyone anticipated. The situation grew exponentially more complex as the franchise expanded beyond games into books. Multiple novel series, the Fazbear Frights anthology, Tales from the Pizzaplex, the graphic novel adaptations, all existing in some ambiguous relationship to game canon that Scott has never fully clarified. He said repeatedly that the books aren't directly canon to the games, but contain answers and parallels that help solve game mysteries. This creates a maddening situation where book information might be crucial to understanding game events, or might be completely irrelevant, depending on which mystery you're examining and how you interpret the relationship between mediums. When the community discovered that a character named Cassidy appeared in both the Silver Eyes novels and a coded message in the survival logbook, was that confirmation that Cassidy exists in the games as a specific character with that specific name? Or was Scott just reusing a name across separate continuities because he liked it and thought it was creepy? These blurred lines between what's canon and what's parallel universe storytelling make many mysteries fundamentally unsolvable without explicit confirmation from Scott. Confirmation that often never comes, leaving us stranded in interpretation. The franchise's evolution also means that mysteries created in early games now exist in a completely different context than originally intended. Golden Freddy's nature made perfect sense as a simple ghost, possessing an animatronic suit in FNAF 1, a fifth victim haunting the location. But after FNAF 4 introduced the crying child and his connection to Fredbear, after FNAF 6 revealed Cassidy's name on a hidden gravestone, after Ultimate Custom Night suggested the one you should not have killed was torturing William Afton eternally, Golden Freddy transformed into a multi-layered enigma that might involve two souls sharing one vessel, or one vengeful spirit with a split personality, or something else entirely that we haven't even considered yet. The mystery didn't get more complex because Scott added clever new clues that deepened our understanding. It got more complex because the lore expanded in directions that created contradictions with earlier, simpler explanations that no longer fit the expanded universe. Many of FNAF's unsolved mysteries exist in this state of retroactive complication, where what seemed straightforward in 2014 became impossibly tangled by 2020, layered over with new information that doesn't quite align with the old. There's also the meta element of Scott's changing intentions that we need to acknowledge. In his interview with Dawko, Scott was remarkably candid about how the meaning of certain mysteries, particularly the infamous FNAF 4 box, has shifted over time based on fan reactions and his own evolving vision for where he wanted to take the series. He's admitted to being influenced by community theories, sometimes incorporating ideas he hadn't originally planned because they were better than his initial concept, more interesting or more thematically resonant. This creates a strange situation where mysteries might not have solutions because they were designed as placeholders. hooks that Scott planned to flesh out later, but then changed direction before providing the payoff. When the creator himself says he's lost track of what was supposed to be in the box, when he admits the original idea has drifted away from him and he doesn't know if he can find it again even if he wanted to, we have to accept that some mysteries might be fundamentally unsolvable, not because we lack information or haven't theorized hard enough, but because the answers were never firmly established in the first place, existing only as vague intentions that evaporated before crystallizing into canon. This doesn't make FNAF's mysteries less interesting. If anything, it makes them more fascinating as examples of emergent storytelling, where the community's interpretations and theories become as valid as any authorial intent, because the authorial intent itself has become uncertain, lost to time and the chaos of rapid development. The unsolved mysteries of FNAF aren't failures of storytelling. They're features of a narrative that grew organically, that changed and adapted over a decade, that sometimes lost track of its own threads while weaving new ones into the tapestry. As we explore each mystery in detail, keep in mind that unsolved doesn't always mean waiting for an answer in the next game. Sometimes it means the answer was never written in the first place, or was written and then erased when plans changed, or exists in a quantum state of being simultaneously true and untrue until observed through some future revelation that may never come. And sometimes, the mystery is better than any answer could be. The locked box from FNAF 4 is perhaps the most iconic, unsolvable mystery in the entire franchise, a symbol of everything that makes FNAF both brilliant and frustrating in equal measure. When players completed Night 7 of 5 Nights at Freddy's 4, they were presented with an image of a locked chest secured with 2 heavy locks, accompanied by text that read, "Perhaps some things are best left forgotten for now." The implication was crystal clear. This box contained something important, something related to FNAF 4's confusing story, something that would eventually be revealed when the time was right and the community had solved enough puzzles to earn the answer. Players immediately began searching for ways to open it, scouring every corner of the game for keys or codes, analyzing every pixel of every screen for hidden meanings, data mining the game files for clues. And they found something interesting. An open sprite for the box existed in the code, which seemed to confirm that opening it was possible, that there was a solution waiting to be found, that this wasn't just a taunt, but a genuine puzzle with a genuine payoff. The community spent months obsessing over this puzzle, theorizing about everything the box might contain. Was it evidence that would solve FNAF 4's ambiguous story? Was it a literal object that existed in the game's universe? Was it metaphorical, representing the truth about the bite of 83 or the crying child's fate? The box became FNAF's white whale, the mystery that consumed more discussion and generated more theories than almost anything else in the franchise. The box even appeared in subsequent games and media, each appearance fueling speculation that the reveal was coming soon. It showed up in FNAF World in promotional images. It appeared in the Charlie novel trilogy, though those books exist in a separate continuity where the box contained Charlotte Emily's body, which probably wasn't the game answer, but felt symbolically significant. Each sighting seemed to promise that Scott was building toward something, that patience would be rewarded. But years passed. FNAF 5, Sister Location, Pizzeria Simulator, Help Wanted, Security Breach, all came and went. The box remained locked. Theories multiplied, but answers didn't. And then in August 2024, almost 9 years after FNAF 4's release, Scott Cawthon finally addressed the box directly in his interview with Dawko. His answer was simultaneously enlightening and devastating. Scott admitted that there was something planned for the box originally, but the idea remained in the ether. He said he'd never pursued that original concept and wasn't sure if he could find it again even if he wanted to. He acknowledged that his answer wouldn't satisfy everyone, and he was absolutely right. After 9 years of speculation, after countless theory videos and forum debates and angry arguments about what the box contained, the creator's official response was essentially, "I had an idea once, but I've forgotten what it was." In that same interview, Scott confirmed what MatPat had theorized, that the box's intended contents had changed over time. Scott explained that the story had evolved significantly from its initial concept, through fan reactions and community theories, and his own drive to craft it into something better than his original vision. This evolution meant that whatever he'd originally planned to put in the box no longer fit the narrative as it had developed. The box became a victim of FNAF's organic growth, a placeholder for revelation that got left behind as the story moved in new directions he couldn't have anticipated. Scott's admission suggests that the box was never meant to remain permanently locked in his original vision, but circumstances, creative changes, the passage of time, and the sheer volume of content he produced have made it effectively unopenable now. Not because we failed to solve it, but because even the person who created it has lost track of what it was supposed to reveal. The answer doesn't exist anymore, except as a ghost of an intention that was never recorded. So what were the leading theories about the box's contents? The community has generated dozens over the years, each with varying degrees of evidence and logical coherence. One popular theory suggested the box contained pieces of evidence from across the FNAF series, physical representations of all the interconnected mysteries. A pieces-put-together concept that would tie everything into one cohesive whole. This theory drew heavily on FNAF 4's tagline, "Was it me?" and the game's themes of puzzles and fractured perception. Another prevalent theory argued that the crying child himself was in the box. Either literally, his body placed there by William Afton as part of the "I will put you back together" process, or metaphorically, representing his fate and identity, which FNAF 4 never explicitly revealed. This theory gained traction because FNAF 4 focused so heavily on this child's story, but never provided clear resolution to what happened after the bite, where his soul went, whether he possessed something or found peace or continued existing in some other form. A third theory suggested the box contained the truth about FNAF 4's player character during the nightmare sequences. Since the community never definitively determined whether we play as the crying child during the nights or as someone else, perhaps Michael Afton reliving his guilt or William Afton conducting experiments, the box could have revealed whose perspective we'd been experiencing all along. The survival logbook hinted at multiple perspectives existing within FNAF 4's story, and solving whose eyes we saw through would fundamentally change the game's interpretation. Yet another theory proposed that the box contained clarification about which bite FNAF 4 depicted. The bite of 83 versus the bite of 87, a question that consumed the community for years before the 1983 date visible on TV screens throughout the game eventually settled the matter for most people. If the box had revealed a definitive date and victim and attacker, it would have settled one of the franchise's earliest and most debated mysteries instantly. Some theorists took a more meta approach, suggesting the box represented FNAF 4 itself, that the game was the box and solving all its mysteries would metaphorically open it and reveal the truth. This theory aligned with Scott's statement that he'd created something too broad and complex, that the answers were hidden in plain sight, but too ambiguous to decipher clearly. The box's two locks could represent the 2 main questions players needed to answer. What happened? And whose perspective are we seeing it from? Under this interpretation, the box remaining locked meant the community had failed to solve FNAF 4 as intended, and Scott had decided to move forward without providing the clear answers that would have unlocked our understanding. More recently, with the announcement and release of the FNAF movie, some fans speculated that the box's contents might finally be revealed through the film series. The first movie featured William Afton's locked box containing mementos from his victims, items that helped him relive his crimes and control the animatronics. This could be Scott's way of recontextualizing the box concept through a different medium, giving it meaning even though he can't remember what he originally intended for the games. The movie's box contained very tangible, disturbing evidence of Afton's murders, physical proof of the missing children incident. If the game box contains something similar, evidence of the crimes that haunt the franchise, it would tie together movies and games while providing at least one answer to the decade-old question. But here's the difficult truth we need to accept about the box. It will almost certainly never be opened in any official capacity within the games. Scott's 2024 admission wasn't him teasing a future revelation or building hype for some upcoming game. It was him closing the book on this mystery, admitting defeat, acknowledging that this particular thread has been lost. When the creator says he's lost the thread, that the original idea has drifted away from him, and he doesn't know if he can recover it, that's as close to a definitive statement as we'll ever get that the box has no answer anymore. Even if Scott decided tomorrow to open the box in FNAF's next installment, whatever he revealed would be a retcon, a new decision made in 2024 or 2025 rather than the unveiling of a long-planned secret from 2015. The original mystery is lost to time, existing now only in the theoretical realm of what Scott once thought before he forgot, before the idea evaporated into the ether as he described it. This makes the box uniquely frustrating among FNAF mysteries. Other unsolved questions remain open because we lack information, or because multiple interpretations exist with equal evidence supporting them. The box remains unsolved because its solution has been actively forgotten by the only person who knew it. It's a mystery that transcended its own fiction and became a mystery about creative process and memory and the limitations of human recall. In a strange way, perhaps some things are best left forgotten for now turned out to be prophecy rather than promise. The box was forgotten, not by the community, but by its creator, and now it exists in a permanent state of Schrödinger's revelation, simultaneously containing everything and nothing until someone observes a specific answer that may never be decided upon. The box teaches us something important about FNAF as a whole that we need to carry forward into understanding every other mystery. Not every thread will be tied off. Not every question will be answered. And sometimes the mysteries we're most desperate to solve are mysteries because they were never fully formed in the first place. Never written down, never committed to any document or file, existing only as a vague intention in Scott's mind that disappeared before it could be made real. As we continue through the rest of these mysteries, we'll encounter some that could theoretically be solved with enough information, and others that might be fundamentally unsolvable for various reasons. The box sits firmly in the second category, a permanent question mark at the heart of FNAF 4's already confusing narrative. And perhaps, despite the frustration, there's something appropriate about that. The series built its reputation on mystery and ambiguity and things hidden in shadows. Having one mystery that remains forever unsolved, that even the creator can't unlock, feels almost fitting for a franchise that has always lived in the space between certainty and doubt, between knowing and not knowing, between revelation and obscurity. If the box is FNAF's most iconic mystery, the crying child's true name is arguably its most fundamental one. This is the character we control during the minigames of FNAF 4. The young boy we watch being tormented by his older brother who wears a foxy mask and thinks terrorizing a traumatized child is peak comedy. We see him experiencing the birthday party that ends in tragedy when his head is placed inside Fredbear's jaws as a cruel prank gone horribly wrong. We witness his final moments in a hospital bed, hear the mysterious voice promising to put him back together, and watch as the heart monitor flatlines, suggesting death. This child is absolutely central to FNAF 4's story, and possibly to the larger franchise narrative, a key figure whose fate might explain Golden Freddy, the puppet's actions, and numerous other mysteries. Yet after 9 years, we still don't know his name. We don't know what his family called him, what his friends at school called him if he had any friends, what his mother called him before whatever happened to her. The community has given him various nicknames out of necessity. The crying child, the most common designation. The bite victim, describing his fate. BV or CC for short in theories and discussions. But these are descriptors, not actual names. They're labels that reduce him to his trauma, defining him solely by his suffering rather than his identity. Unlike the other children in FNAF whose names we've learned through various means, Gabriel possessing Freddy, Jeremy and Bonnie, Susie and Chica, Fritz and Foxy, Cassidy and Golden Freddy, and Charlotte Emily as the puppet, this one crucial child remains nameless, anonymous, undefined. The lack of a name goes beyond simple curiosity or completionism. In FNAF's narrative framework, names matter tremendously. They represent identity, individuality, the transformation from anonymous victim to recognized person with history and humanity. The missing children aren't just 5 kids who died at Freddy's in our discussions. They're Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, each with their own gravestone bearing their name in FNAF 6's ending, each acknowledged as a person who existed and mattered and deserves to be remembered. Charlotte Emily isn't just the first victim or the puppet kid. She's Charlie, Henry's daughter, a character with family and history and relationships that give her death weight and meaning. Even Elizabeth Afton, William's daughter who possessed Circus Baby, has a name we know definitively, spoken in her voice lines and confirmed through multiple sources. The crying child's namelessness feels deliberate, as if Scott is withholding this information for a specific reason we haven't uncovered yet, or can't provide it because the character's ultimate fate and significance remain undecided in the lore, too tangled with other mysteries to commit to a specific identity. Several theories have emerged trying to identify the crying child's name through various puzzle-solving methods. One of the earliest and most persistent theories claims his name is Evan, based on security logbook clues that supposedly spell out different names through various puzzle methods involving word searches and coordinate systems and connecting letters across pages. The logbook contains multiple hidden elements, and solving certain codes yields letters that some believe spell Evan when properly arranged. This same logbook confirmed Cassidy's name through a similar word search puzzle, so using it to find the crying child's name seems logical, following established patterns. However, the Evan theory has never been officially confirmed by Scott or any game, and not all fans agree that the letters actually spell Evan when properly decoded. Some argue the puzzles spell out something else entirely, or that they're pointing to Cassidy rather than the crying child, or that the whole thing is too ambiguous to consider definitive proof without creator confirmation. The fact that you can manipulate the logbook's puzzles to support multiple different names depending on which clues you prioritize, and which solving methods you use makes it frustratingly unreliable as evidence. Another theory, less popular but still circulating in certain corners of the community, suggests the crying child might be named Chris, based on different interpretations of logbook clues and some voice actor credits that fans analyzed and tried to connect to character names. This theory has largely fallen out of favor as more people accepted Evan as more likely, but it demonstrates how desperate fans are for any canonical confirmation. When a character this important remains unnamed for nearly a decade, people will grasp at any potential clue, no matter how tenuous or questionable the methodology used to extract it. The fact that two completely different names, Evan and Chris, can be proven through essentially the same evidence shows how problematic this mystery has become. Without Scott directly confirming which, if any, of these names is correct, they remain in the realm of fan theory rather than established fact. There are best guesses, not knowledge. And that distinction matters when we're trying to build coherent timelines and understand character relationships. A third possibility that some fans have considered, though it's less common, is that the crying child doesn't have a traditional name at all, that his namelessness is itself significant to his role in the story. If the crying child represents something conceptual rather than a literal person, if he's meant to be every child, a representation of innocence destroyed by negligence and cruelty and family dysfunction, then giving him a specific name would undermine that symbolic function. He's not John or Michael or David. He's the crying child, the universal victim, the representation of childhood trauma. This interpretation is less common because it goes against FNAF's usual pattern of personalizing its victims, making them individuals rather than symbols. But it offers an explanation for why Scott has never revealed the name. Perhaps he never created one because the character isn't meant to be individualized in the same way the other children are. The "I will put you back together" promise adds another layer of complexity to the name mystery. This cryptic line, delivered by the Fredbear plush in the hospital scene, has been debated endlessly since FNAF 4's release. Some believe it's William Afton speaking through a device hidden in the plush, promising to rebuild his son as a robot, using the remnant technology he's developing. Others think it's Henry Emily reaching out, or even the puppet's spirit, Charlotte, trying to help the dying child, offering comfort or plotting to give him supernatural life. The interpretation of this line fundamentally affects whether we think the crying child died and moved on, died and became a wandering spirit, died and was resurrected as something mechanical, or somehow survived and continued living in altered form. Each of these outcomes would affect whether revealing his name matters to the larger story. If he truly died, and his spirit found peace in happiest day, his original name might not be relevant anymore to current events. If he became someone else, transformed into Glitchtrap or connected to the Mimic, or turned into some other entity we haven't fully identified, his original name might be hidden precisely because revealing it would solve multiple mysteries at once, creating a domino effect of revelations. The crying child's relationship to Michael Afton and Elizabeth Afton is confirmed across multiple sources. They're siblings, children of William Afton, a deeply dysfunctional family. This makes his namelessness even stranger and more noticeable, because his siblings' names are known and spoken and established. Why would Scott hide one Afton child's name while revealing the others? It creates an inconsistency that draws attention to itself. Some fans theorize this is because the crying child might have gone by multiple names during his life, perhaps being adopted at some point, or having his identity changed for reasons we don't understand, making his real name ambiguous even within the story. Others suggest that his name is hidden because he's actually a character we know under a different identity in later games. That the crying child grew up or was rebuilt or transformed into someone else in the franchise, and learning his birth name would immediately reveal that connection, solving the mystery of what happened to him after FNAF 4. This connects to another major unsolved mystery that we need to address. Did the crying child survive the bite of 83 or die from it? FNAF 4's ending is deliberately ambiguous in ways that have frustrated people for years. We see the flatline, the sound effect suggesting death, but we also see the Fredbear plush continuing to talk afterward, suggesting something supernatural is happening that transcends normal death. If the child died, where did his soul go? Did he become Golden Freddy alongside or instead of Cassidy? Did he become Shadow Freddy, a dark reflection of the animatronic that killed him? Did he simply pass on to whatever afterlife exists in FNAF's universe? If he survived, how did he recover from having his frontal lobe crushed by animatronic jaws? The human brain doesn't typically bounce back from that kind of trauma. Did William rebuild him using his developing remnant technology, creating a cyborg son? Did he become a full robot with the original child's memories implanted? These questions tie directly into the name mystery, because confirming his fate would likely require confirming his identity, and vice versa. They're tangled together in ways that make solving one without the other nearly impossible. The FNAF community has largely settled on calling him the Crying Child, or CC, out of practical necessity, needing some way to reference this character in theories and discussions, without typing out the younger son of William Afton, who died in the bite of 83 every single time. But these nicknames highlight what we've lost by not having his real name. Gabriel isn't the Freddy kid. Jeremy isn't the Bonnie victim. They have names that restore their humanity, that acknowledge them as individuals who had lives before they became animatronic vessels, who had birthdays and favorite foods and dreams and fears beyond just the moment of their deaths. The crying child remains defined solely by his suffering, by the tears he shed throughout FNAF 4, and the injury he received at his birthday party. Without a name, he's incomplete, frozen forever in the moment of his trauma, unable to be fully understood or fully mourned or fully integrated into the larger narrative in the way the other victims have been. Scott's silence on this topic is particularly notable because he's clarified so many other aspects of FNAF lore over the years when confusion reached critical mass. He's confirmed timeline placements when the community was genuinely lost. He's verified character connections when people were arguing in circles. He's occasionally stepped in to correct widespread misconceptions that were leading theories astray. Yet he's never addressed the crying child's name directly, never hinted at whether Evan is correct, or Chris is correct, or neither is correct, never given any indication that this mystery has a definitive answer waiting to be revealed in some future game or book. This suggests one of two possibilities. Either the name is being saved for a major revelation that requires perfect timing and context that hasn't arrived yet, some future story where revealing his identity becomes the emotional or narrative climax, or Scott himself hasn't decided on a canon name, preferring to leave it ambiguous, and the moment to reveal it naturally in the narrative never arrived. So it remains undefined, existing in a state of quantum uncertainty. Given his admission about forgetting what was in the box, it's entirely possible he created the crying child's story without assigning him a specific name, thinking he'd decide on one later when it became relevant, and then the moment to reveal it never came. The story moved forward, new characters were introduced, new mysteries took priority, and the crying child's name got left behind, forgotten, or indefinitely postponed. The name Mystery also significantly affects how we interpret the survival logbook, which is one of the few pieces of FNAF media explicitly designed to be solved by players through puzzles and codes. The logbook contains conversations between at least two spirits, possibly more, written in different styles and colors throughout the book. One spirit asks questions, another answers, and they seem to be communicating across time or death or some boundary we don't fully understand. Identifying these spirits is crucial to understanding FNAF's deeper lore and the relationships between characters and events. Most fans believe one spirit is the crying child and another is Cassidy, both trying to piece together their identities and fates, helping each other remember. But without confirming the crying child's name, we can't be completely certain which entries belong to him versus other entities that might be communicating through the book. Is he the one asking questions about favorite memories and birthday parties? Or is he the one answering in faded text? The name functions as a key that would unlock our understanding of these logbook conversations and potentially solve several mysteries simultaneously. In the end, the crying child's missing name represents a fundamental gap in FNAF lore. A piece of information so basic that its absence feels wrong and deliberate. We can construct elaborate theories about remnant and agony and possession mechanics. We can map out complex timelines spanning decades with multiple locations and character appearances. But we can't answer the simple question of what this child was called by his family before everything went wrong, before his brother's prank went too far, before William Afton's crimes destroyed any chance at a normal life. Whether Scott is saving this reveal for some future installment, hasn't decided on a canon name and prefers keeping it ambiguous, or considers the ambiguity itself important to the character's role as a universal victim, the result is the same. One of FNAF's most significant characters remains anonymous nearly a decade after his introduction. His name is out there somewhere, maybe in the box that will never open, maybe in Scott's notes for a game that will never be made, maybe existing only in the realm of developer intention that never crystallized into canon. Until that changes, if it ever does, we'll keep calling him the crying child. A descriptor that captures his suffering but not his identity. A name that isn't a name at all, just a description of the state we found him in, crying and afraid and doomed. Golden Freddy has been an enigma since the very first 5 nights at Freddy's game, where he appeared as a rare, unsettling Easter egg, a slumped animatronic suit sitting inexplicably in your office, staring at you with empty black eyes before crashing your game if you didn't flip up the monitor fast enough. Unlike the other animatronics who moved through the restaurant following predictable patterns that you could track with camera systems, Golden Freddy simply materialized, seemingly existing outside the normal rules that governed everyone else. He didn't walk, he teleported, he didn't follow AI routines. He appeared and disappeared based on random number generation and player observation. The community immediately recognized this character as special, different, more paranormal than the rest of the cast. Over the course of the series, Golden Freddy's nature has only become more complex and confusing, raising questions that after 10 years still lack definitive answers that satisfy everyone or account for all the evidence. The central mystery is this: is Golden Freddy possessed by one spirit or two? And perhaps more importantly, who is possessing this particular animatronic? What makes them so different from the other children's spirits? The discovery of Cassidy's name through the survival logbook seemed like it might solve this mystery cleanly and finally. By using coordinates hidden throughout the book to spell out letters in a word search grid, players determined that one of the missing children, the 5th victim, was named Cassidy. This lined up perfectly with evidence suggesting 5 children possessed the original animatronics: Gabriel and Freddy, Jeremy and Bonnie, Susie and Chica, Fritz and Foxy, and the 5th in Golden Freddy. The FNAF 6 ending showed 6 graves, 4 with visible names matching the confirmed children, 1 obscured belonging to Charlotte Emily, and 1 covered partially by grass that the logbook identified as Cassidy's. This should have been simple and clean. Cassidy possesses Golden Freddy, mystery solved, everyone can move on. But FNAF is never that straightforward, and this mystery is where it gets particularly tangled. The complication arose when fans started noticing substantial evidence that a second soul might be involved with Golden Freddy. The crying child from FNAF 4, whose entire story centers around Fredbear, the golden bear animatronic that bit him, seems too intimately connected to ignore. The fact that his dying moments were spent surrounded by Fredbear imagery, that his nightmares featured this character prominently in the most terrifying forms, that he was literally killed by this animatronic's jaws in front of a crowd of children. All of this suggested his spirit might have become attached to the golden bear in death. But if Cassidy already possesses Golden Freddy, where does that leave the crying child? Is his soul just floating around unattached? Did he possess something else entirely? Did he move on peacefully despite the trauma? None of these options felt quite right. One popular theory emerged to explain the contradiction. Both souls possess Golden Freddy simultaneously. A unique situation in FNAF lore where a single animatronic hosts 2 separate spirits, sharing the same vessel. This dual possession theory gained significant traction because it explains several oddities about Golden Freddy's behavior across the games. In FNAF 1, Golden Freddy appears in 2 distinct forms: the slumped full-body suit sitting in your office and a disembodied floating head that fills the screen during his jump scare. Could these represent 2 different souls manifesting through the same animatronic, each expressing themselves differently? In FNAF 2's Give Gifts, Give Life minigame, the puppet gives life to 4 children who become the withered animatronics. But then a 5th child appears afterward, separate from the others and seemingly added later before Golden Freddy jump scares the player. Does this 5th child represent a second soul joining one that's already present? The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling enough that many fans accepted dual possession as the most likely explanation for Golden Freddy's strange nature. It explained the contradictions. It accounted for both Cassidy and the crying child. It made narrative sense. Then Ultimate Custom Night added another wrinkle with its heavy focus on the one you should not have killed, heavily implying that Cassidy is the vengeful spirit tormenting William Afton in the game's purgatory scenario. The Fredbear Death Coin Easter egg, where using a death coin on Golden Freddy triggers a unique Fredbear jump scare with different sound effects and visual presentation, seemed to distinguish between Golden Freddy and Fredbear, suggesting they might be separate entities or separate spirits within the same entity expressing themselves independently. The Old Man. Consequences minigame showed a young boy, often interpreted as either the crying child or possibly Cassidy, being told to rest and leave William's punishment to others. If this boy is the crying child, it suggests he's separate from the vengeful spirit, supporting the dual possession theory with Cassidy as the vengeful one and the crying child wanting peace. If it's Cassidy being told to rest, it might contradict his role as the eternal tormentor, unless there are 2 aspects of Cassidy's personality in conflict. The gender question adds even more confusion to this already messy situation. Cassidy is presented as female in the Silver Eyes novels and the FNAF movie, given feminine pronouns and characterization. but the face seen in Golden Freddy's jump scare in Ultimate Custom Night appears to be a blonde boy, matching common descriptions and fan interpretations of the crying child's appearance. Did Scott change Cassidy's gender between different media? Are we seeing the crying child's face instead of Cassidy's in that moment? Are both spirits somehow visible simultaneously, layered over each other? The inconsistency makes it impossible to definitively say who or what we're looking at when Golden Freddy appears, and whether we should be using he or she or they when discussing this character. The Fazbear Frights books, specifically the story The New Kid, introduced Andrew, a vengeful spirit who parallels Cassidy's role in the games almost perfectly. Andrew is male, wears an alligator mask, and refuses to let William Afton die, keeping him alive to suffer endlessly. Many fans believe Andrew is the book universe version of Cassidy, existing in the parallel continuity that Scott uses to clarify game events without directly spoiling them. But if Andrew equals Cassidy in the books, and Andrew is male, does that confirm game Cassidy is male? Or does it mean nothing because the books aren't direct canon and genders can change between continuities? This circular reasoning perfectly captures how FNAF mysteries feed into each other, creating situations where you can't solve one without solving several others simultaneously, and every answer requires assuming something else that hasn't been confirmed. Then there's the physical impossibility to consider. Golden Freddy is often described in the games as a spare suit, a Springlock-style Fredbear suit kept in the back rooms for parts or storage. But Springlock suits were designed to hold one person, fitted with complex mechanisms that compress the robotic parts to make room for a human performer. The entire point of Springlock technology was creating a dual-function costume that could be an animatronic or a suit, but always for one occupant. How could a Springlock suit designed for a single occupant house two souls? Some theories suggest the souls aren't literally inside the suit in a physical sense, but attached to it spiritually. That possession in FNAF doesn't require physical containment, the way we might imagine with ghosts needing anchors. Others argue that Golden Freddy never was a functional Springlock suit, that he's always been a phantom or hallucination, which would explain why he can teleport and appear as just a head and generally break the rules that govern other animatronics. If he's not physically real in the traditional sense, two souls sharing him becomes less problematic. The Happiest Day minigame in FNAF 3 seemed to offer closure, showing 5 children receiving cake and moving on, presumably finding peace and being freed from their haunting. The 5th child, represented by the crying child sprite receiving cake from the puppet, is widely believed to represent Golden Freddy. But does moving on mean both souls, if there are 2? Did only one find peace while the other remained behind to torment William Afton in Ultimate Custom Night? Is the child in that minigame the crying child, Cassidy, or an amalgamation of both that we're supposed to interpret flexibly? The ambiguity prevents us from using Happiest Day as definitive proof of anything except that someone found peace, maybe possibly, in one of the endings, if we're interpreting it correctly. More recent games have complicated things even further without providing clarity. In Security Breach, we see references to Golden Freddy through Vanessa's security badge being numbered so 46713983, which fans interpret as containing 1983, the year of the crying child's death. The Princess Quest arcade games feature a yellow character who might represent Golden Freddy or Cassidy, helping Vanessa break free from Glitchtrap's control. But these hints don't clarify the possession question. They just add more connections without explaining what those connections mean for Golden Freddy's fundamental nature. Some fans have proposed more radical theories to explain the confusion. One suggests that Golden Freddy isn't possessed by child spirits at all, but by agony, the emotional energy that creates shadow animatronics in the Fazbear Frights universe. Under this interpretation, Golden Freddy is a manifestation of concentrated suffering rather than a traditional ghost, which would explain his reality-breaking abilities and why he seems more powerful than other animatronics. Another theory posits that Cassidy was killed twice, once as part of the original missing children incident, and again later under different circumstances, resulting in a split or duplicated soul with conflicting memories and motivations. These theories require accepting mechanics that FNAF has never explicitly confirmed in the games, making them difficult to prove or disprove without Scott stepping in to clarify how possession and remnant and agony actually work in his universe. What makes the Golden Freddy possession mystery so uniquely frustrating is that it should be simple. We know possession happens in FNAF. We know children's souls inhabit animatronics. We know roughly how many children were killed, and we know most of their names. Golden Freddy should just be another case like Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, where we can say, this child possesses this animatronic, and move on. But the dual soul possibility, the crying child's undeniable connection to Fredbear, Cassidy's vengeful nature, the inconsistent depictions across games and books, the gender confusion, the physical and metaphysical questions, all of these create a tangled web where every answer requires assuming something else that hasn't been confirmed. Scott's silence on this specific issue is notable and frustrating. He's never directly addressed whether Golden Freddy has one or two souls in any interview or post. He's never clarified if the crying child became Golden Freddy or something else or nothing at all. He's never explained why Cassidy appears different across different media, or why Golden Freddy behaves so differently from other possessed animatronics. This could mean the answer is obvious to him and he doesn't feel it needs explanation because it's spelled out clearly enough in the games. Or it could mean the answer hasn't been finalized, that the ambiguity is intentional because committing to one soul or two souls would require restructuring other parts of the lore that depend on that answer remaining flexible enough to accommodate future story directions. In the end, the most honest answer to who possesses Golden Freddy is, we think it's Cassidy, probably. Maybe with the crying child also involved somehow, possibly. Unless it's actually something completely different that we haven't considered, because we're missing crucial information or misinterpreting evidence. This non-answer frustrates fans who want definitive lore, clear timelines, concrete facts, but it perfectly encapsulates how FNAF mysteries work in practice. We have pieces of the puzzle. We can see how they might fit together in multiple different configurations. But without the box lid showing us what the completed image should look like, we can't be certain our arrangement is correct or complete. Golden Freddy remains FNAF's most persistent character-based mystery, a golden question mark sitting in the corner of the lore, staring at us with empty eyes, waiting for clarity that may never arrive. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie, also known by the impossible-to-pronounce file name QFSFASXC, are perhaps the most overlooked major mysteries in the entire Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. While other enigmas generate endless discussion and dedicated theory videos with millions of views, the shadow animatronics exist in a strange space where most fans have collectively shrugged and decided we'll probably never know what they are. So why bother theorizing? They first appeared in FNAF 2 as rare game-crashing Easter eggs, pitch-black silhouettes with glowing white eyes and teeth that showed up randomly in your office or lurking in the hallways, usually when you were already stressed about the actual threats. Unlike the other animatronics whose origins and purposes were gradually revealed through subsequent games and hidden lore, the shadows have remained fundamentally mysterious, appearing sporadically across the series without ever receiving a proper explanation or spotlight moment. What we know about them is frustratingly minimal considering how long they've been part of the franchise. Shadow Freddy resembles a dark, purple-tinted version of Golden Freddy or Fredbear, slumped in the parts and service room in FNAF 2, where he'll sometimes appear in the darkness. Shadow Bonnie is a pitch-black silhouette of Toy Bonnie, who can crash your game in FNAF 2 if you stare at him too long, and appears in FNAF 3's hidden minigames to help trigger the good ending. In FNAF 3, Shadow Freddy seems to lure the other animatronics to the safe room where William Afton dismantles them one by one, leading to his own spring-locked death when the spirits corner him. This suggests Shadow Freddy might be connected to Afton somehow, or working toward Afton's goals, or manipulating events to trap him. But why would a shadow entity care about this? How would it have the agency to plan and execute a scheme? These questions go completely unanswered. Shadow Bonnie's appearance in the FNAF 3 minigames, where playing as this character lets you reach other minigames that eventually lead to Happiest Day, suggests a benevolent or at least purposeful role in freeing the children's souls. But again, the reason for this involvement, the source of this entity's power and motivation, is never explained or even hinted at. The most substantial clue about the Shadow's nature comes from FNAF AR Special Delivery and the Fazbear Frights book, Hide and Seek. In the AR game, collecting too much Dark Remnant causes Shadow Bonnie to appear and attack you, creating a mechanical connection between Shadow Bonnie and this substance. The book describes Shadow Bonnie explicitly as being composed entirely of Dark Remnant, a corrupted form of the soul-binding substance William Afton uses. Though whether this applies to the game continuity remains uncertain given the book's ambiguous canonical status, it's our first substantial lead in understanding what these things actually are. This provides our first substantial lead toward understanding the shadows. They could be manifestations of agony, negative emotional energy given semi-physical form, emotional trauma and suffering crystallized into something almost tangible that can move and act. This theory aligns with broader FNAF lore about remnant and agony that's been developed through the books. Regular remnant, the substance William Afton uses to grant artificial life to animatronics, is created through intense emotions at the moment of death, binding souls to metal. Dark Remnant seems to be a corrupted or purely negative version, emotional trauma and suffering crystallized without the positive elements that make regular Remnant work. If the shadows are essentially walking Dark Remnant, they'd be agony incarnate, the physical manifestation of all the fear, pain, and death that's occurred in Freddy Fazbear's locations over the years. This would explain their supernatural abilities like teleporting, game crashing in meta terms, and existing in multiple places simultaneously. They're not bound by physical rules because they're not physical entities in the traditional sense, just concentrated negative energy wearing the shape of animatronics that have caused trauma. But where did this agony come from specifically? One popular theory suggests the shadows originated from spring lock failures, the horrific accidents that Phone Guy mentions in his training tapes from FNAF 3. He describes multiple simultaneous spring lock failures that led to the suits being temporarily retired, and these failures would have been horrifically painful deaths, slowly crushing the performers inside as spring locks snapped closed on living tissue over the course of minutes. The agony of dying this way, trapped inside a mascot costume as metal pieces puncture your organs and crush your bones, could have been intense enough to create shadow entities, with Shadow Freddy representing a Fredbear springlock victim and Shadow Bonnie representing a Spring Bonnie Springlock victim. This theory has compelling circumstantial evidence. The shadows resemble the Springlock suits, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. They appear in locations where Springlock suits were used during the dangerous period before they were retired, and their ethereal nature fits the idea of death imprints rather than traditional ghosts with full souls and personalities. Residual trauma that achieved enough density to become semi-real. An alternative theory connects the shadows specifically to the crying child and his experiences. The crying child witnessed something traumatic in the FNAF 4 backstage area, possibly seeing his father or an employee putting someone into a suit, or seeing the aftermath of a Springlock failure, or witnessing something else disturbing that we never get full context for. He was terrified of the animatronics, particularly Fredbear, to the point of having nightmares that consumed his final days. When he died from the bite, his fear and trauma could have created shadow versions of the animatronics that haunted him most. Dark reflections born from his psychological torment. This would make Shadow Freddy a manifestation of the crying child's fear of Fredbear, and Shadow Bonnie a similar fear shadow of Spring Bonnie, assuming he encountered that character at some point. Some variations of this theory suggest the crying child himself became Shadow Freddy after death. His soul too traumatized to properly possess an animatronic in the normal way, instead becoming this dark echo that can barely interact with the physical world. Yet another possibility is that the shadows are fragments of souls that didn't successfully possess animatronics when the puppet gave gifts and gave life to the missing children. Maybe not all the souls fully merged with their animatronic bodies in that process. Shadow Freddy could be a piece of Cassidy that split off during the possession process, unable to fully integrate with Golden Freddy. Shadow Bonnie might be leftover essence from Jeremy, the child possessing Bonnie, or some other victim whose soul didn't cleanly transfer from death to animatronic. This would explain why the shadows seem to have limited agency and purpose compared to the fully possessed animatronics who have clear motivations and personalities. They're incomplete, partial beings rather than whole souls, fragments that achieved just enough cohesion to manifest, but not enough to become fully functional spirits with memories and goals. The shadows' roles in FNAF 3 provide contradictory information about their allegiances that makes pinning down their nature even harder. Shadow Freddy leads the animatronics to their deaths, helping William Afton dismantle them, which suggests he's working against the children's interests, actively harming them. But those deaths lead directly to Afton's own demise in the Springlock suit, which suggests Shadow Freddy might have been manipulating events to trap Afton all along, sacrificing the animatronic vessels to corner the man who murdered the children inhabiting them. Shadow Bonnie appears in the hidden minigames specifically to enable Happiest Day, the good ending where the children find peace and are freed from their haunting. This seems benevolent, genuinely helpful, working toward the children's liberation. But why would one shadow work against the children while another helps them? Are they even the same type of entity operating under the same rules? The tonal inconsistency makes it difficult to assign clear motivations or origins to the shadows as a unified group. Maybe they're not a group at all, just two completely unrelated phenomena that happen to be dark and spooky. FNAF World added more confusion by including both shadows as playable characters with specific abilities and stats. But FNAF World's canonical status is questionable at best. The game presents itself as semi-canon, with the clock ending providing important lore about setting up Happiest Day in FNAF 3, but the bulk of the game is clearly non-serious, breaking the fourth wall constantly and including joke characters. Do the shadows' portrayals in FNAF World tell us anything about their real nature in the main games? Or are they just game mechanics divorced from lore, fun additions with no deeper meaning? It's impossible to say definitively. The Shadow's infrequent appearances in later games suggest Scott doesn't consider them crucial to the evolving story. They show up as Easter eggs and callbacks, little nods to longtime fans, but never as major plot elements or characters who drive events forward. This could mean their origins and purposes are considered settled, that the community has figured them out well enough through the Dark Remnant connection that elaboration isn't necessary. Or it could mean Scott himself isn't sure what to do with them, that they were created as creepy Easter eggs in FNAF 2 without long-term plans, and now they exist in this weird limbo where they're too established to ignore completely, but not important enough to focus development time on. The file name rwqfsfasxc for Shadow Bonnie is itself a mystery that has entertained the community. Fans joke that it's unpronounceable, with some attempting rwqfsfasxc or just giving up and calling him Shadow Bonnie. But why this specific string of letters that seems like random keyboard mashing? Is it random, or does it encode something? Is it an acronym where each letter stands for a word? Is it a cipher that needs to be decoded? Some theorists have tried treating it as various puzzles, searching for hidden meaning in the letter patterns, but no convincing solution has emerged that makes sense or gets confirmed. The randomness might be the point, emphasizing how alien and unknowable this entity is, existing outside normal naming conventions. Or it might just be Scott being deliberately obscure, because even he doesn't have a specific identity in mind for this character. So why bother giving it a name that would imply more planning than actually exists? What makes the Shadow mystery particularly difficult and frustrating is that solving it wouldn't necessarily clarify anything else in the lore. Unlike the Crying Child's name, which would unlock logbook mysteries and potentially explain Golden Freddy, or the box contents, which could have explained FNAF 4's confusing story, knowing definitively what the Shadows are wouldn't dramatically impact our understanding of the main plot or character relationships. They're peripheral enough that the story works fine whether they're Springlock victims or agony manifestations or soul fragments or something else entirely we haven't considered. William Afton's crimes happened either way. The missing children's tragedy occurred regardless. The Shadow's existence or nature doesn't change Henry's plan or the puppet's actions or anything else that matters to the core narrative. This relegates them to perpetual mystery status, because Scott has no narrative pressure to provide answers. They can remain spooky, unexplained entities lurking in the background without breaking anything important. The most likely explanation, boring as it might be to those hoping for elaborate backstories, is that the Shadows are exactly what the Fazbear Frights book suggests. Manifestations of agony, dark remnant given form by the cumulative trauma that permeates Freddy Fazbear's locations, like radiation that seeped into the walls. They're not specific people, not possessed by individual souls with names and histories, just the emotional residue of suffering achieving enough density to create entities that can move and act. Shadow Freddy represents the agony associated with Fredbear, all the fear and pain connected to that character. Shadow Bonnie represents the agony associated with Spring Bonnie for similar reasons. They help or hinder the main characters not out of personal motivation or conscious choice, but as expressions of the trauma that drives FNAF's entire supernatural element. They're symptoms rather than causes, effects rather than agents, the background radiation of horror made visible. But most likely doesn't mean confirmed, and confirmation is what separates theories from facts in FNAF lore. Until Scott explicitly states what the Shadows are in a game or book or interview using words that can't be misinterpreted, They'll remain in this ambiguous zone where we can point to evidence, draw connections, build logical frameworks, but we can't know with certainty. We can't state it as fact. We can only theorize and hope we're close to whatever truth exists, if any truth exists at all. The shadows are perhaps the purest example of FNAF mysteries that exist more as atmosphere than plot points, entities that are scary and mysterious because they're scary and mysterious, not because their specific origins and motivations matter to understanding the larger story. In a franchise obsessed with answers and solving puzzles and uncovering every secret, the shadows remind us that sometimes things can just be unknowable, ephemeral questions that lurk in the background without demanding resolution. They're the mysteries you accept rather than solve, the gaps in knowledge that you acknowledge and move past, because filling them wouldn't actually change anything important. And maybe that's okay. Maybe not every shadow needs to be explained. Maybe some things can stay dark. The Bite of 87 is one of FNAF's oldest mysteries, mentioned in Phone Guy's very first message in the original Five Nights at Freddy's game back in 2014. He casually mentions that the animatronics are no longer allowed to walk around during the day after the Bite of 87, where someone's frontal lobe was bitten off, but they apparently survived. This single line launched years of speculation, countless theory videos, and community debates that still haven't reached definitive consensus, because Phone Guy never specifies which animatronic was responsible, or who the victim was, or what exactly happened. When FNAF 2 was released as a prequel set in 1987, fans naturally expected clear answers about this infamous incident that had been teased. Instead, the game raised even more questions, introducing multiple suspects and never definitively showing the bite actually happen, leaving us with implications and possibilities, but no concrete answers. The prime suspects from FNAF 2 are Mangle, Toy Chica, and Toy Bonnie, though various other theories have floated around over the years. Mangle became the leading theory early on because of her damaged state and the specific way her endo head hangs with exposed teeth in a position that could feasibly reach someone's head. She's literally called the Mangle, a name that implies violence and trauma in her history. Her placement in Kids Cove, where children would interact with her, combined with her ability to crawl through the ceiling, suggested she had access to victims at unusual angles, like perhaps from above, where she could drop down onto someone's head. The fact that Mangle is one of the most aggressive animatronics in FNAF 2, constantly crawling through the vents towards you in gameplay, added to her culprit credentials in fan discussions. She's mobile, she's damaged, she's got exposed teeth, she's in a position to reach heads. The pieces seem to fit. Toy Chica emerged as a serious counter-theory, especially after Ultimate Custom Night, because of her missing beak. When you see Toy Chica in UCN, she has a voice line that says, "Where's my beak?" lodged in your forehead, of course, which many interpret as a direct reference to the Bite of 87. If Toy Chica bit someone's frontal lobe, her beak could have broken off and remained stuck in the wound, explaining why she's missing it when she roams in FNAF 2's gameplay. This theory gained massive traction after UCN seemed to be winking at the community about it. But skeptics argue this could just be Scott playing with fan theories rather than confirming anything canonical. He's done that before, referencing community jokes and speculation in ways that seem significant but might just be Easter eggs. Toy Bonnie is the dark horse candidate in this race, mostly suspected by process of elimination and the fact that he's positioned prominently in marketing materials and is generally considered one of the more menacing toy animatronics. Some fans point to the mysterious incident on the day shift that Phone Guy mentions in his final call, where Jeremy Fitzgerald, the FNAF 2 night guard, is moved to day shift and then something happens. If Jeremy the guard is somehow related to Jeremy the murdered child, maybe his bite during the day shift is the famous bite of 87, though this requires several assumptions that the game never confirms. Here's where it gets complicated and frustrating. FNAF 4 introduced the bite of 83, a completely different bite incident where the crying child gets his head crushed by Fredbear's jaws during his birthday party. For years, the community debated whether FNAF 4 was showing the bite of 87 or a separate earlier bite, analyzing every detail of every minigame for clues. The 1983 date visible on various TV screens throughout FNAF 4 eventually convinced most of the community that this was a different incident entirely, the bite of 83, which predates the events of FNAF 2. This means the bite of 87 remains completely unshown in any game, despite being the inciting incident for numerous policy changes. FNAF 2, which takes place in 1987 according to the paycheck dates, never depicts any bite happening to anyone. Phone Guy mentions the unfortunate incident on day shift in his final call to Jeremy, but we never see what happens, never learn which animatronic was involved, never get confirmation of anything concrete. It's all implications and aftermath with no actual event shown. The fact that the victim survived without a frontal lobe is itself medically interesting and narratively significant. The frontal lobe handles personality, decision-making, impulse control, and various cognitive functions that make you who you are as a person. Losing it would fundamentally change someone, altering their personality and behavior dramatically, but they could theoretically survive. Some fans speculate this explains why certain later characters behave strangely, that they're the bite victim living with severe brain damage. But this has never been confirmed or even strongly hinted at. It's unclear if Scott intended the survival detail as a plot point that matters, or just flavor text to make the backstory more disturbing and memorable. Another wrinkle worth examining. Phone Guy's exact line in FNAF 1 is, "It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know?" This phrasing is ambiguous. Is he amazed because he personally witnessed it happen, implying he was present during the bite of 87 and saw the victim survive? Or is he amazed in a general sense, stating a medical fact he finds interesting? If he witnessed it directly, that would place the bite at a location where Phone Guy worked, presumably one of the Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations. But which one? The FNAF 2 location that gets closed down? The original Freddy's from FNAF 1, somewhere else entirely? FNAF 2's location gets closed and the animatronics get scrapped or relocated to the FNAF 1 location. So if the bite happened there, it would explain why that specific location shut down so quickly after opening. But again, we're never shown this explicitly. We're left inferring and guessing and building theories on top of theories. The prohibition on daytime movement is interesting from a lore perspective, because it implies the bite happened during operating hours with an animatronic in free-roaming mode, interacting with customers as intended. This narrows the suspects somewhat to animatronics that would have been active during the day. The toy animatronics were specifically designed for daytime interaction with children and had facial recognition software linked to criminal databases to detect potential threats. If one of them bit someone during normal operations, it would make perfect sense to ban daytime free roaming and scrap the entire toy line as fundamentally unreliable and dangerous. The withered animatronics from FNAF 2's back room weren't in active service during the day, so they couldn't have caused it at that location. Unless the bite happened at a different location entirely with different animatronics, which would mean FNAF 2's characters are all innocent, and we've been looking at the wrong suspects for a decade, barking up the completely wrong tree. Some fans argue that the bite of 87 doesn't actually matter to the larger plot, that it's just world-building detail to make the universe feel lived in and dangerous, giving context to the company's paranoid security measures. Under this interpretation, Scott never intended to show or solve it definitively. The mystery itself is the point, creating atmosphere and backstory without needing to spell out every detail. Knowing which animatronic bit someone in 1987 doesn't change the missing children incident, doesn't affect William Afton's murders or Henry's revenge plan or any major plot threads. It's trivia, flavor, background noise. This might explain why nearly every game since FNAF 2 has essentially ignored the bite of 87, never referencing it or building on it or providing new clues. If it were crucial to understanding the story, if it mattered to the timeline in significant ways, later games would presumably reference it or build on it or circle back to it. Instead, it's mentioned once in FNAF 1, implied in FNAF 2, and then essentially forgotten by the franchise as it moves forward with new locations and new characters and new incidents to worry about. But here's the counter-argument to dismissing it as unimportant trivia. Phone Guy specifically brought it up as explanation for animatronic behavior changes and company policies. The fact that they can't roam during the day directly affects how Fazbear Entertainment operates and how night guards experience the locations. It's part of the reason the FNAF 1 location keeps animatronics on lockdown at night, why later security measures get implemented. It's not just flavor. It's a turning point in how the company handles the possessed machines they don't understand. Learning what actually happened and why it happened would give us insight into how much the company knows about the supernatural elements possessing their animatronics. Did they ban daytime roaming because an animatronic malfunctioned mechanically? Just a terrible accident with a faulty machine? Or because they realized something darker was controlling the robots, something malicious that made them attack people intentionally? The company's response and reasoning would tell us about their awareness of the haunting, which matters for understanding later cover-ups and decisions. The confusion between the bite of 83 and bite of 87 consumed literal years of community discussion, with fans analyzing every pixel of FNAF 4, trying to prove which bite it depicted, arguing about whether the TV screens showing 1983 were definitive evidence or red herrings. Scott eventually clarified through those subtle context clues, like the dates shown on TVs and the minigame context. But he never outright said, FNAF 4 is not the bite of 87 in those exact words. This ambiguity seems deliberate, as if Scott enjoys watching the community struggle with these questions. Or perhaps he regrets creating the 87 mystery in the first place, since it's become this unfulfilled promise that fans won't let go of. Every time a new game releases, there's speculation that this will finally show us the bite of 87, and every time we're disappointed when it doesn't. It's become a running joke in the community at this point, this mystery that's always one game away from being solved, perpetually deferred to some hypothetical future installment that never arrives. The actual answer might be completely mundane and disappointing. Maybe Scott created the bite of 87 as background lore in FNAF 1 without having specific details in mind, just thinking it sounded ominous and mysterious and gave context to the animatronics' restricted movement. When FNAF 2 became a prequel set in 1987, fans naturally expected to see it, but Scott hadn't planned that far ahead in detail. Rather than forcing a bite scene that he hadn't fully conceptualized, he left it ambiguous and implied. Then FNAF 4 offered an opportunity to show a bite incident, but he made it 1983 to preserve the 87 mystery rather than definitively solving it, perhaps thinking he'd address the real bite of 87 later. But later never came. Now it's been so long and the story has moved so far beyond 1987, dealing with security breach in the 2030s or so, that going back to address a bite incident from decades ago would feel random and disconnected from current plot lines, focused on the mimic and Vanny and whatever comes next. What's clear after 10 years is that we're no closer to a definitive answer than we were in 2014 when Phone Guy first mentioned it. Mangle remains the most popular culprit by fan consensus and process of elimination, but it's consensus built on circumstantial evidence rather than hard proof. Toy Chica's UCN line gives her a strong claim, but it could easily be a joke or red herring rather than canonical confirmation. Toy Bonnie is possible, but lacks specific evidence beyond being present, aggressive, and having access to the day shift. Some animatronic bit someone's frontal lobe off in 1987 during daytime operation, causing massive policy changes at Fazbear Entertainment that affected all future locations. That's all we know for certain. The who, where, why, and detailed circumstances remain lost to FNAF's perpetually incomplete documentation of its own timeline. The Bite of 87 has achieved almost legendary status in its unsolvability, a question so old and so consistently unaddressed that it's become a meme in the community. Whenever Scott releases new content, fans joke, "Will this finally show us the Bite of 87, knowing the answer will be no?" It's the mystery that's always one game away from being solved, perpetually deferred to some hypothetical future installment. Maybe that's its true purpose in the narrative. Not to be solved, but to remain forever just out of reach. A reminder that some questions in FNAF don't have answers waiting in the next game. They have absence, the persistent gap where an answer should be but never arrives. The silence where revelation was promised, but never delivered. Few mysteries in Five Nights at Freddy's have generated more debate, more theories, more complete bewilderment and frustration than the fundamental question of what FNAF 4 actually depicts during its nighttime gameplay. When you play the nights, defending yourself against Nightmare Freddy, Nightmare Bonnie, Nightmare Chica, Nightmare Foxy, and the absolutely horrifying Nightmare Fredbear with his stomach full of teeth. Are you experiencing real events or dreams? Are these physical animatronics stalking through a real house, or manifestations within someone's sleeping mind? This isn't just an academic question about narrative interpretation or artistic intent. The answer fundamentally changes how FNAF 4 fits into the timeline and affects our understanding of multiple other games and characters. Yet after years of discussion and multiple subsequent games that reference FNAF 4's events, we still don't have a definitive answer that accounts for all the evidence and satisfies all the contradictions. The dream theory was popular from the very beginning and seemed obvious to many players. The nighttime gameplay takes place in a bedroom where you check doors, a closet behind you, and the bed for animatronics emerging from impossible locations. The environment feels domestic, personal, like a child's nightmare where monsters lurk in familiar spaces and safety is always just out of reach. The minigames between nights show the crying child being tormented by his brother with a foxy mask, being scared constantly of the animatronics at Fredbear's family diner, developing severe phobias that consume his daily life. It makes perfect narrative sense that a terrified child would have nightmares about the things he fears most, that his subconscious would transform Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy into the grotesque nightmare versions we encounter. The sharp teeth exposed far beyond what real animatronics would have. The exposed mechanical parts. The general horror movie aesthetic. All of this fits perfectly with how a child's mind might distort real animatronics into something worse, exaggerating and corrupting them through the lens of fear. Supporting this dream interpretation strongly, The pills and IV drip visible on the bedside table in later nights suggest the player might be hospitalized or medicated, consistent with the crying child being in a coma after the bite of 83, the hospital bed, the beeping monitors shown in the minigames, the promise from the Fredbear plush to put you back together. All of this creates a framework where the nightmare gameplay could represent the crying child's dying dreams, his mind creating scenarios where he faces his fears in his family's home over and over as his body fails in a hospital room somewhere. The jump scare screams sound disturbingly like a child screaming rather than mechanical sounds or animal roars, reinforcing the idea that these aren't real robots, but figments of a traumatized imagination. Everything about FNAF 4's presentation screams, this is psychological horror, not physical danger. But then details emerged that complicated the clean dream theory significantly. Sister Location revealed a small section in the private room where you can see a bedroom layout that matches FNAF 4's house almost exactly, with a monitor showing what appears to be the player's view from the bedroom and an observation note on the desk nearby. This implied that the FNAF 4 house might be a real location used for experiments, with the bedroom set up to be monitored by cameras and equipment. Why would someone be watching a child's bedroom this closely? What kind of experiments would require recreating a house and monitoring someone as they sleep or play through scenarios? The Sister Location connection suggested the nighttime gameplay might depict real events. Actual animatronics created specifically to terrorize someone as part of William Afton's twisted research into fear and remnant and whatever else he was studying. The private room in Sister Location contained blueprints and design specifications for the nightmare animatronics specifically, showing their construction as real machines with detailed mechanical designs. These blueprints also showed something called sound illusion discs, technology borrowed from the FNAF novels that could create hallucinations or alter perceptions, making ordinary animatronics appear monstrous or changing how people perceive reality around them. If sound illusion discs are canon to the games, which the blueprints seem to suggest, then the nightmare animatronics could be real robots outfitted with technology to make them seem even more terrifying than they physically are. Pair this with the gas canisters visible in FNAF 4's bedroom that match the observation rooms in Sister Location, and you get a disturbing picture of elaborate fear experimentation where a test subject is exposed to both real animatronics and perception-altering substances to create intense nightmare experiences while technically awake. But who's the player character experiencing these nightmare sequences? Most people initially assumed it was the crying child, which made sense thematically. But serious issues arose with this interpretation. The crying child dies after the bite in 1983. His heart monitor flatlines in the final minigame. Yet, FNAF 4's gameplay environment includes references to later games, like the phone on the bed that looks identical to the phone from FNAF 1 set in 1993. How could the crying child, who died in 1983, be dreaming about or experiencing details from games set after his death? Some theorists propose that we play as Michael Afton, the older brother who caused the bite, experiencing these nightmares years later out of guilt for what he did to his younger brother. This would explain the FNAF 1 connections perfectly and place FNAF 4's nighttime gameplay after FNAF 1 in the timeline rather than during 1983. The survival logbook seemed to support Michael as the player when it included drawings of the nightmare animatronics alongside casual references to casual bongos and other FNAF 4 elements, as if Michael was recording his nightmares in this book after experiencing them. But then the logbook also showed conversations between at least two spirits, likely the crying child and someone else, suggesting the crying child's perspective is also present in FNAF 4 somehow. Could we be playing as both characters at different points, experiencing both the crying child's original trauma and memories, and Michael's later guilt nightmares, using the same house and animatronic designs? The game never clarifies, leaving us to speculate endlessly. Scott Cawthon himself added to the confusion when he mentioned in his Doco interview that FNAF 4's story was too broad, that people focused on the wrong things like debating Byte of 87 versus 83 instead of understanding the story he was trying to tell. But he never clarified what that story actually was, what we were supposed to focus on, leaving fans to continue guessing. Did the nighttime gameplay matter to the story at all? Or was it just atmospheric gameplay divorced from the plot? Just fun horror scenarios that don't need to be explained narratively? Were we supposed to ignore the nightmare sequences entirely and focus purely on the minigames? This ambiguity from the creator himself suggests he might not have fully decided how the nighttime sections fit into canon, that they exist in a weird space between game mechanics and story elements. The experiment theory gained significant popularity after Sister Location's revelations, proposing that William Afton created the nightmare animatronics as part of his research into fear, remnant, and whatever twisted goals drove him. Perhaps he tested them on his own children, using the crying child and Michael as subjects to study how terror affects perception, behavior, and potentially soul manifestation. The sound illusion discs would enhance the horror, making already scary robots seem absolutely nightmarish. The gas visible in the bedroom would keep subjects compliant or disoriented, or alter their mental state. Under this interpretation, the nighttime gameplay is real in the sense that the player is genuinely in that house defending against actual animatronics. But it's surreal because the perception-altering technology makes everything seem more nightmarish than physical reality, blurring the line between what's actually there and what the subject is experiencing. However, this raises deeply uncomfortable questions about timeline and logistics. If these are William's experiments on his children, when did they happen? Before the Byte of 83? After? If before, why would he torment his already terrified son who's having a mental breakdown? If after, how was the crying child available to experiment on if he died? Did William somehow keep him alive artificially, or bring him back to continue testing? The experiment theory requires accepting that William was conducting elaborate psychological torture on his own family, using cutting-edge animatronic technology and hallucinogenic substances, which fits his character as a serial killer, but seems overly complicated even for him. Some fans proposed a middle ground that tries to account for both dream and reality evidence. The nightmares are based on real animatronics that existed and were used for something sinister in William's experiments. But the FNAF 4 gameplay we experience represents someone remembering or dreaming about those experiences rather than living them in real time. Memories would explain why details from different time periods blend together, why the house feels both real and unreal, why the animatronics behave with dream logic like spawning from impossible locations. This nightmare memories theory lets the sister location evidence be canon while maintaining the psychological, personal feel of the gameplay. The experiments happened, the nightmare animatronics were real, but we're experiencing them through the distorting lens of traumatic memory or guilt-fueled dreams, complicating everything even further. FNAF VR Help Wanted recreated the FNAF 4 gameplay as part of its virtual reality environment, suggesting that in-universe, Fazbear Entertainment had documentation of these events detailed enough to program them into a VR game. How would they know the layout of William Afton's secret experiments or the crying child's private nightmares unless there were records, cameras, data to work from? This implies the events were documented, recorded, observed by someone, which supports the experiment theory over pure dreams. Then we have the Twisted Ones novel, which introduced animatronics that use illusion discs to appear different from their actual forms, matching the sound illusion disc technology hinted at in Sister Location. The twisted animatronics in the books are buried underground and can make themselves appear more or less horrifying depending on disc settings, literally changing their perceived appearance. If this technology exists in the game universe as the Sister Location blueprints suggest, William could have created real animatronics that changed their appearance through perception manipulation, making them seem like the nightmare versions we see in FNAF 4, even though they might look more ordinary when the discs are turned off. The Halloween update to FNAF 4 added Nightmare Balloon Boy and Nightmare Mangle, animatronics that didn't exist yet in the crying child's time, since they weren't created until FNAF 2's Location in 1987, after the crying child died in 1983. This seemed to confirm that we can't be playing as the crying child during the nighttime sections, since he couldn't nightmare about characters that didn't exist during his lifetime. But Scott stated these Halloween animatronics aren't canon, just fun additions for the season. Does that mean we should ignore them when analyzing the lore completely? Or do they reveal timeline truths accidentally, even if they're not canon characters, suggesting through their mere presence that the player can't be the crying child? The line between what's narrative and what's just game content keeps blurring in confusing ways. The honest assessment is that FNAF 4's nighttime gameplay occupies a space between dream, memory, reality, and experiment that was never meant to be cleanly categorized into one simple answer. Scott created a horrifying survival horror experience set in a house, something different from the security office gameplay of previous entries, and the story elements around it evolved as he developed Sister Location and had to integrate FNAF 4 into the larger narrative he was building. The result is a game section that everyone agrees is important somehow, but nobody can definitively explain in a way that accounts for all evidence. Are the nightmare animatronics real robots used by William for fear experiments enhanced by sound illusion discs and gas? Are they purely psychological manifestations of trauma experienced by the crying child or Michael? Are they dream corruptions of real memories from when either character encountered actual animatronics? Are they a VR simulation, a fictional recreation of events that didn't happen exactly as shown? The answer is probably yes, kind of, sort of, to multiple options simultaneously. FNAF 4 seems designed to be interpretable multiple ways at once, a Rorschach test where dream theorists and reality theorists can both find evidence supporting their positions. Scott's comment about people missing the point suggests the nighttime gameplay might not have a clear literal interpretation that we're supposed to map onto the timeline concretely. It might be meant to be experienced symbolically or atmospherically, rather than solved like a puzzle. But FNAF fans are puzzle solvers by nature and training. Telling them not to worry about whether something is real or a dream goes against the entire puzzle-solving ethos the series built its reputation on. We're left in limbo, knowing the nightmare animatronics appear in multiple contexts across games, knowing there's evidence for both reality and dreams, knowing Scott considers the story too broad and the fan focus misplaced, but having no single definitive answer to the simple question: in FNAF 4, is what we're experiencing real? The only honest response is, sort of, probably, in some sense, depending on how you interpret reality within a universe that includes soul possession and remnant and sound illusion discs. and agony manifestation, which isn't much of an answer at all. But it's the closest we've got, and it might be the closest we'll ever get unless Scott decides to finally, definitively clarify what he intended. And given his admission about forgetting what was in the box, that clarification might never come. Among the many cryptic 8-bit minigames scattered throughout Five Nights at Freddy's like breadcrumbs leading nowhere, Midnight Motorist from FNAF 6 stands out as perhaps the single most baffling. While other minigames had unclear elements that were eventually solved or at least narrowed down to a few interpretations, Midnight Motorist remains almost completely opaque years after its introduction, defying every attempt to crack its meaning. We can describe what happens on screen easily enough. The minigame begins with an orange figure driving a purple car along a road. Various objects appear in the background as you drive. There's a building called JR's that the orange man tries to enter, but he's turned away with text saying, "Come on, you know you can't be here. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be." So the orange man is banned from JR's for some reason we're never told. As you continue driving, other locations appear in the background, including what might be Fredbear's Family Diner, though the 8-bit graphics are too vague to confirm definitively. Eventually, the orange man reaches a house where another figure, gray in color, is watching television. When the orange man tries to interact with this person, presumably asking about someone else, the gray figure responds with lines like, "Leave him alone tonight," and "He had a rough day." The orange man then goes around to the back of the house where a bedroom window is broken, presumably from the inside out, with small animal-like footprints leading away from the window into the forest. Examining the broken window triggers text saying, "Ran off to that place again. He'll be sorry when he gets back." The orange man appears frustrated, but doesn't pursue the child who escaped. The minigame ends with the implication that someone in the household has repeatedly snuck out to a forbidden location despite being told not to go there. Simple enough as a sequence of events you can observe and describe. But who are these people? When is this happening? What does it mean? That's where it all falls apart into chaos. The orange man is widely believed to be William Afton, though the unusual color choice has sparked debate. Some theories suggest he's not purple yet, because this takes place before he started murdering children seriously. With the purple coloring in other games perhaps serving as a visual indicator of his killer status that he hadn't yet earned at this point in time. Others argue the orange coloring means he's not William at all, but a different character entirely, possibly Henry Emily, with the purple car belonging to someone else who drove to JR's before the orange man took it or borrowed it. If we accept that orange man represents William, the rest starts to form a possible picture that might make sense. The gray figure watching TV could be Michael Afton, William's older son, told to leave his younger brother alone. The child who ran off could be the crying child, William's younger son, who we see being terrified of animatronics in FNAF 4, but who might be drawn to Fredbear's Family Diner despite his fear, perhaps out of curiosity about his father's work or an attempt to understand the animatronics that frighten him so badly. The broken window and sneaking out aligns with FNAF 4's depiction of the crying child as isolated and seeking escape from his home situation, though the minigames never showed him actually running away. That place might be Fredbear's, where the crying child keeps going despite being told to stay away. Perhaps because he's trying to overcome his fear or because something draws him there that we don't understand. But timing becomes a massive issue with this interpretation. Midnight Motorist appears to take place at night in the rain, with the orange man returning from somewhere. Some theories connect this to the night Charlie Emily was murdered outside Freddy's, proposing William is driving home after killing Henry's daughter. which could explain why he's banned from JR's if he'd caused a scene or been aggressive there earlier that evening while drunk or angry. The rain would match the rain in the FNAF 2 security puppet minigame, where Charlie dies outside in the alley. This interpretation would date Midnight Motorist to around 1983 or earlier, shortly before the crying child's death at his birthday party. The proposed sequence: William murders Charlie in a fit of jealousy toward Henry or rage at something, drives to JR's bar but gets kicked out for prior behavior, drives home angry and wet, discovers his youngest son has once again escaped to Fredbear's, despite everything going wrong in the family, and becomes frustrated, but is too emotionally exhausted or drunk to deal with it properly. However, alternative theories place Midnight Motorist much later in the timeline, potentially after the crying child's death. In this interpretation, the child who ran off isn't the crying child, but a different character entirely, possibly a young Henry Emily, possibly Michael, possibly some other victim of William's manipulation that we haven't identified. That place might not be Fredbear's, but a later FNAF location, where animatronics are kept, explaining why the child keeps going there despite presumably being told not to. The person watching TV might not be Michael, but William's wife, Mrs. Afton, who appears so rarely in the lore that her involvement would explain why we've never heard about her. She's the gray figure in this one minigame and nowhere else, an absent presence. The mound of dirt near the house has sparked wild theories that consume discussion threads. Some see it as a grave, possibly where William buried Charlie's body after murdering her, the fresh earth still visible and suspicious. Others think it's just dirt from a construction project or normal yard work, meaningless scenery that Scott included because houses have yards and yards have dirt. The fact that it's prominently visible and positioned where players naturally look has convinced many it must mean something important. But what? If it's a grave, whose? Not the crying child's, since he dies at Fredbear's and his body would presumably be taken to a hospital, not buried in the backyard immediately. Unless William did something with the body afterward, retrieving it somehow and burying it near the house, which gets increasingly dark and complicated to imagine. JR's itself is a mystery within the mystery. Is it a bar, a restaurant, a friend's house? The "you can't be here" dialogue suggests William is banned from this establishment for some prior incident. But why? Did he get in a fight? Was he caught doing something illegal? Is this an establishment that knows about his crimes and refuses to serve him? The fact that we see it at all implies it's important somehow, but its role in William's story is completely undefined. Some fans have tried connecting the JR initials to characters in the franchise, suggesting it might be Junior's, owned by someone we know. But this requires inventing characters or connections with no evidence supporting them. It's speculation built on speculation with nothing solid underneath. The purple car itself is odd and generates debate. William is always associated with purple in the mini-games across multiple games, but here he's orange while the car is purple. Did William borrow or steal the car from someone? Is the car purple because it belongs to him, and the orange coloring for his person is an error or artistic choice that doesn't mean anything? Or is the car purple because we're meant to associate it with William even though the driver is someone else entirely? The color inconsistency has fueled endless debates about whether we're even correct that orange guy is William, or whether we've been assuming wrong for years. The text, "Later that night," appears before Midnight Motorist, suggesting it takes place after another event we've seen. But which event? Presumably the Fruity Maze minigame that comes before it, where Susie, one of the missing children, is lured away by William. But what connects these events chronologically? Are they the same night? Different nights? The sequencing is deliberately unclear. Some theories say the fruity maze shows William killing Susie, and then Midnight Motorist shows him driving home afterward, placing both on the same night. Others say they're unrelated, just ordered that way for game flow reasons. Without clear confirmation, we're guessing. The person watching TV, whether Michael or Mrs. Afton or someone else, tells William he had a rough day. This implies knowledge of what happened to the child who ran away. But what happened? Was he bullied at school? Scared by something at Fredbear's? Traumatized by something William did? The vagueness could be intentional, applying to multiple possible scenarios. Or it could be specific to an event we're supposed to identify but can't without more information. The broken window and footprints suggest the child has done this before, that sneaking out to that place is a pattern of behavior. But children don't typically break windows to escape their own houses repeatedly. Glass is dangerous, and parents would notice and repair it. Does this mean the first escape broke the window and this current absence is the same night, the child having not returned yet? That would make more sense practically. But the text says ran off again, which sounds like a recurring pattern, though the broken window suggests a recent event. These details conflict unless we assume the child breaks a different window each time, or the family doesn't repair windows for some reason, both of which seem unlikely. That place being shown with a specific building in the background during the drive sequence might give us a visual clue to its identity. But the 8-bit graphics are too vague to definitively identify what we're looking at. It could be Fredbear's, could be Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, could be some other location entirely that we've never seen before. The building has a bright glow suggesting indoor lighting, consistent with a restaurant or entertainment venue open at night. But this doesn't narrow it down enough to be useful for solving anything. Some truly wild theories have emerged to explain Midnight Motorist when straightforward interpretations failed. One suggests the whole minigame is metaphorical rather than literal, representing William's mental state and guilt through symbolism instead of showing actual events. The orange coloring represents his humanity before he fully became the purple killer we know. The banned bar represents normal social life he can't access anymore after his crimes. The house represents his fractured family structure falling apart. The escaped child represents either his son's soul leaving after death, or represents innocence fleeing from corruption. Under this interpretation, we're not watching actual events, but a psychological landscape, making questions about timing and identity irrelevant, because it's all symbolic. It's an interesting reading that accounts for the weirdness, but it's impossible to prove or disprove, and it feels like giving up on solving it literally. Another theory posits that we're not playing as William at all during Midnight Motorist, but as some other character, possibly a witness to William's crimes or someone investigating him. The orange color distinguishes this player character from William, and we're visiting William's house and observing his family situation from an outsider perspective. This would explain why the dialogue seems to be addressing someone at a distance, rather than directly interacting with family members. But it introduces new questions about who this orange person is and why we're following them, creating more mysteries than it solves. Scott's silence on Midnight Motorist has been absolutely deafening. While he's clarified some other confusing minigames, or at least acknowledged that fans were on the right track with certain theories, he's never addressed this one directly in any interview or post. He hasn't confirmed it's William, hasn't verified the timeline, hasn't explained JRs or the mound or the color inconsistency or literally anything about it. This could mean the community has already figured it out correctly, and he sees no need to confirm what's obvious to him. Or it could mean even he's not sure what it depicts anymore. That like the box, the intended meaning has drifted away over time as he focused on other projects. Or perhaps he's saving the reveal for some future game or book where Midnight Motorist's events will suddenly become crucial context that makes everything clear. The most frustrating aspect is that Midnight Motorist feels important in ways random Easter eggs don't. It's prominently placed in FNAF 6 as one of the few minigames you can play. It takes effort to access, requiring specific actions. It clearly shows character relationships and events that should matter to understanding the Afton family. It's not a throwaway Easter egg. It's a crafted sequence with specific details and dialogue. Yet it might as well be a throwaway Easter egg for all the understanding we've extracted from it after years of analysis. We've had years to analyze every detail of this minigame, and we're no closer to community consensus than when it first appeared, which is unusual even for FNAF. Most mysteries eventually accumulate enough evidence or community agreement to settle on likely answers even without official confirmation. Midnight Motorist remains in complete disarray, with wildly different interpretations that can't all be true, but we can't determine which one is correct. The most honest assessment is that Midnight Motorist might remain forever unsolved, not because we lack cleverness or dedication, but because it was created during a period when Scott's narrative was evolving rapidly, and the specific details he intended might not have been fully formed even when he made it. It exists in that dangerous space where it feels significant, but might ultimately be insignificant, where it seems like it should tell us something important, but the message got lost in translation from Scott's mind to the game. We'll keep theorizing, keep proposing new interpretations, keep hoping that the next FNAF game will finally provide context that makes Midnight Motorist make sense. But that context might never come, and we'll be left driving that purple car through the pixelated night forever, banned from JRs, heading home to a broken window, never quite understanding what we witnessed.